Hello, friends. Welcome to Out the Table. I'm Ray, one of the pastors here at Front Street, and we're delighted you're joining us today, no matter where you are or where you're coming from, whether it's LA or Little Washington or Plymouth or New Bern, wherever you're watching from. Thank you for joining us. I was watching a video of a friend of mine, and many of you know this friend of mine. You've seen him around at Front Street. He's our videographer. He's actually behind the camera right now. And he did a teaching moment at White Plains United Methodist Church, a sister church and the church that I came from to serve Front Street. And I had been thinking about kind of the very topic that he's dealing with, but I'd never, ever in my wildest dreams have thought about taking it where he starts. He starts really with Genesis 1 and 2. Now, when you think about Genesis 1 and 2, what do you think about? I know, argument about when did creation start and all that sort of stuff, but what he helped me discover is there's a more foundational element, and I would dare say a greater element than those kinds of theological, historical, argumentative points. And it just so stuck with me. I literally texted him when I finished watching this, with Jay, are y'all going out of town this weekend? Are you around Labor Day? Yeah, well, you want to preach? And it's probably a little bit lazy. It's Labor Day. But anyway, so I invited him to preach. But you get a preamble. You get a taste of it today at the table. And so I invite you to come this Sunday. You'll hear Jay. I'll be here with you. Jay will be here. And you'll get to hear more of this. And I don't want to give it away because it is just a powerful, powerful understanding of the Genesis story and where we are in it. So enjoy this at the table with my friend Jay Helms.
Good morning. You don't normally see me on this side of the camera. I'm normally over there, but I have my buddy James here helping film us. And we're out in nature, in creation this morning. I'll show you where we're headed a little bit later. I wasn't clever enough to think of this, but a friend recently told me the First Testament is this: creation. What you're looking at behind me here. That's actually God's First Testament. So we want to take a step back and look at that. But we're going to look at it. What does the Bible actually tell us about the First Testament? The First Testament speaks for itself, but the Bible does talk about it quite a bit, actually. What comes to mind when you think about Genesis 1 and 2? Is that a delightful subject? Is that an argumentative subject? Is that frustrating? Is it interesting? Is it a head scratcher? Is it a subject you don't really want to talk about? Let's do this. Let's take this in two parts. Number one, let's talk about this story in its context, historically, compared to other stories of its time. And then we're going to talk about the creation itself in a way where we can take a closer look at what it is, what it physically is, and what that tells us about who God is and who we are. So today, I want to take a look to start off with. I invited our friend Dr. Brent Strawn, a professor at Duke Divinity School and author. I asked him, what is it that we're taking for granted in this story that we have in Genesis 1 and 2?
I mean, this material is so familiar to us that it really has now become, as they say, familiarity breeds contempt, or at least familiarity breeds boredom, or lack of ability to kind of see with fresh eyes or be amazed. That's a problem with Scripture writ large. I think if we go back to it and really pay attention to it, the things we have taken for granted are actually shocking, and we no longer take them for granted. We could differentiate what we get in Genesis, in the Bible generally, from other contemporary accounts in the ancient world in two primary ways. One is that, at least in Genesis 1, we don't have any trace of the god or the gods creating through chaos, like violence, chaotic struggle against other gods, typically, or through sexual procreation. And so those two things, that creation is the result of violence among the gods, or a kind of procreative activity between Mr. Head God and Mrs. Head God, that's absent from Genesis 1. Now, we do have other texts in the Bible about creation, and some of those evoke more of the violent aspects, like Psalm 74, where God is kind of in conflict with the dragon from the sea, which is sort of similar to some ancient Near Eastern accounts. But for the most part, the violence bit and all together the sexuality bit is absent from the creation accounts in the Bible, and that means that God is creating, peacefully, out of benevolence, out of blessing, out of the largesse, you could say. God doesn't have to create, and God is not creating in ways that are related to violence or sex in any sort of way, but instead out of this just generosity, as it were, of God's Spirit. And that's why it's so interesting to note, as some people have, that when God creates first, God of course creates just through speaking in Genesis 1, but that and with immediate effect, let there be light, and there was light. But maybe one of the most interesting words in that very familiar line is the word there. Let there be light. That there's something now created outside, as it were, of God's own immediate self, or that God's making room, at least. And that's completely different than anything we encounter in the Near East. And so this God who creates peacefully, very orderly, and with blessing throughout, and blessing for animals, for fish, for birds. All these things get blessed, and then humans come along, and they're great too, and they're blessed as well. But they're just kind of the last of a series. And the real climax, of course, in Genesis 1 into 2 is God's resting on the Sabbath. So the sanctification of a day is also, just a kind of unheard of concept in the ancient Near Eastern account of creation.
If you heard this and you were somebody of that around the campfire or whatever, if you heard this, what did you hear?
You heard of just a radically, well, I think, a lot of people think that Genesis 1 sort of came into its full form in the Babylonian exile, where people are living basically in a ghetto of one of the great superpowers of the world as forced exiles and immigrants, hunkered down, trying to make a way in the world, trying to preserve their traditions, their lives, their families. And so when this text gets recited in that kind of context, what they hear is there is another way to imagine the world. There is another God that is at work in the world. And what do you know? God has us in mind from the get-go and blesses us. And not just us, but all of humanity, which is fascinating, because that means it has to include those oppressors and conquerors as well, that they too have been created somehow in the image of God, whatever that might mean.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Brent. How cool.
But I'm fascinated to think of, where's the first place that you can remember being aware of creation? Actually, for me, I grew up in Cary, and the first place I was fully aware of, like, creation, not just me or my life or my family or whatever, but the first place I can remember being aware of creation was as a kid on Dabney Road, walking in the grass, shoes off at night in our house. Next question is, what is the most spectacular place that you've experienced creation? Think for a second. Most spectacular place you've experienced creation. For me, it was actually Monument Valley. I remember, I'd seen it in all the John Wayne movies, and it was in the Transformer movies, and it's all these different movies. I'm like picturing Forrest Gump, when he's running and when he stops. It's like that part of the country. There's a spot with East Mitten Butte and West Mitten Butte, these two like this. You can look them up online. When we pull in, driving in our van with our kids, we come around this corner and you see Monument Valley. I've seen a few spectacular things. I remember the first time I saw Yosemite Valley when you come out of the tunnel. That was incredible. But the one that left me most just stunned was this. So we come in our van, we pull around, and you see Monument Valley, and it's not just the monuments, it's an actual valley. Like, something happened there that was incredible. To leave these buttes standing, something happened. They're remaining, and whatever the land was that was there before is now a huge valley. That's the place where I was most stunned by creation. All right, now let's ask the flip question. Where's a place where, in the simple, mundane ordinariness, you can remember experiencing creation? I'm talking like not huge, not incredible, but just as fantastic, but just not a big spectacle, not a huge experience. Sometimes it's actually where we live now is sitting and just seeing the flowers that my wife has planted. We planted a bunch of zinnias, and just seeing those. Creation is really amazing. If creation was a gift you opened on your birthday, let's say God put this in a box and handed it to you for your birthday and said, to you from God, what would your reaction be to what this is? What would your reaction be? Would you say, this is a good gift? Would you say, this is all right? Or would you say, this is the best gift ever? See, I think sometimes we're overlooking in the fight about what Genesis 1 and 2 is saying, we're overlooking that it's such a good gift. Some people say that the universe was created, everything that God created was created ex nihilo. This is the phrase that scholars use, out of nothing. There was nothing except God, and God creates out of nothing. But there's been a shift recently that I find fascinating, that some scholars, some biblical scholars, have begun to say that actually, according to what we have in Genesis, the universe was created ex amore, out of love. I like that story. I like that story quite a bit. That's not a story I feel like I defend. That's a story I feel like I get to enjoy. So if this life and this place was created out of love, out of a God who wants to love us and wants us to dive in and love something, that's pretty fantastic, right? So my closing question, and it's a long one, my closing question is this. When you hear music, does that make you love God and love others more? When you cook food, does that make you love God and love others more? When you hear laughter, when someone tells a joke, does that make you love God and love others more? Animals. When you see a stream, when you create, does that make you love God and love other people more? When you swim, does that make you love God and others more? If you surf, for me, I can't surf, but even when I see other people surf, that makes me love God so much more. When you ski, when you jog, when you run, when you bike, when you stand in the rain, when you stand in the snow, when you have to learn about mitochondria in biology class, does that make you love God more? My hope with this is that we're able to see that this place is given by a good gift giver, and it's exquisite. It is, and we're promised that those things that make it tough now are ultimately going to come to an end, and there will be a new heaven and new earth. And we will live in a place where all the things that we have loved, now we can love even more fully and more deeply, where death will be no more, and it's been defeated as Jesus died and rose from the grave. So this, friends, I just want to push us in the direction of enjoying and celebrating creation, because that's the point of the story in Genesis. There's a God who loves us and wants to be with us, creates a gift for us, and meets us in the place that is that gift.
I'll be honest with you. I never thought about this. All of creation is God's gift, God's present, God's wrapped up present for you and me to enjoy the life that we live. You ever thought about how audacious that is? They have a God so loving, he said, here you go. Everything that is good is God's gift offered to you. Listen, I'm so glad you joined us today. Don't forget, if you're in the Burlington area, we'd love for you to come by and be part of our worship experience. The other thing is, make sure, if this did anything for you, or if you felt good about this, that you will like and share. And again, my White Plains friends, who I dearly love, thank you for sharing Jay today with us and for this Sunday. Listen, we'll see you next week. If not before, at the table. We'll see you.
When it shines a light, whenever God shines his light on you.